Satoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Maheti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So yesterday we saw very briefly, a brief introduction to Bhakti Yoga. We discussed what Krishna meant when he said that the path of those who follow the path of jnana, which seems more abstract, is more difficult, more pain-bearing than the path of a bhakta. And we saw the various ways that statement can be understood. We also saw how our concept of God, our understanding of who God is, evolves as we evolve. And so now to proceed with this, after describing to Arjuna that the path is more difficult for those who go after the formless, in verse 6 and 7 Krishna says, Yetu sarvani karmani mai sanyasya matparaha ananyenaiva yogena mam dhyayanta upasate teshamaham samudharta mrityu samsara sagarat bhavami na chirat partha mayaveshita chetasam. But those who worship me, resigning all actions in me, regarding me as the supreme goal, meditating on me with single-minded yoga, to these whose mind is set on me, verily I become before long, O son of Pritha, the savior out of the ocean of the mortal samsara. And we saw yesterday also, whenever Krishna uses the first person pronoun me, he is not referring to the historical dimension. Krishna is the son of Devaki and Vasudeva, but Krishna, the real being, the spirit, the Atma, behind the body and mind. And so every time we can safely and confidently substitute, wherever Krishna says me, substitute it with your own idea of the divine. You can say Atman, or you can say Vishnu, you can say Shiva, you can say what, it will be equally applicable. So what he is saying here is that when this is a very important word, Ananya Naiva Yogena, Ananya Yoga, Anya. Anya is other. An is the prefix which means not other. When we pursue anything with single-minded attention, success will come sooner than if our attention is diverted in many different directions. This is as much true in our secular pursuits as in spiritual pursuits. So even if someone has a purely worldly goal in mind, but if that person pursues that goal with single-minded attention, they will get it. And of course, it's so much more true with regard to spiritual life as well. It's not so much that we will get what we want. Of course we will get what we want sooner or later. But whether that which we want is really in our best interest in the long term, that's the major problem. As they say that if you, and this was actually said by Swami Akhandananda, a great disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, he said, if you want something, you will get it. Not according to your calendar. You might say within 6 months, or that may not happen, because God has their own calendar. But if you want something really desperately, madly, crazily, no matter how worldly or materialistic that is, if you want something, you will get it. If you don't want anything, you will get everything. And that's tough. If we can truly touch our heart and say, I don't want anything, everything will come. It's so much easier to want something. And therefore, sometimes I say that God shows that God loves us. God's love for us is shown by the many prayers which are not answered. I think that's the greatest grace of God, that most of our prayers are not answered, because the point is we don't know what's good for us. Of course, we seek things thinking that they'll bring us joy. I mean, who would consciously, knowingly want pain and suffering in life? And a lot of times we find that much of the pain and suffering that we get in life is not necessarily, when you play tennis, there are sometimes they say the unforced errors. It's a little bit like that. Of course, if pain and suffering comes for no known effort on my part, then of course I can't hold myself. But a lot of times, much of the pain and suffering we experience in life is a result of some of the choices we made or the decisions we took in our life. Now, we took those decisions in good faith, thinking that, that is something that's going to bring me happiness. In retrospect, it turns out, that was not a good choice, a good decision. So, prayer, I like to think that prayer is the one practice in spiritual life which is always effective. All prayers are answered. They are just not answered with a yes. You see, normally we say prayer is answered means we think God agrees. But I think no is an answer. So if I pray for something, to want something, and I don't get it, that prayer has been answered with a no. And a lot of times we will find that because we don't know what's good for us and because God loves us, it's possible that we would have suffered much more if all of our prayers had been answered. And so, as we evolve in our path of bhakti, rather than asking God for give me this or give me that, we might then, our prayer itself might evolve into then saying, God, give me what is good for me. I'm incapable of knowing what is best for me. I often make mistakes. None of us knows what's in the future. But God knows everything. So best to say, you choose. Try that out and see. I think it will always work. So that's what Krishna is saying. So Ananya Yoga means that I don't have any other goal. The Swami Vivekananda's well-known quote is there. He says, take up one idea, make that one idea your life, think of it, dream of it, live on that idea, and leave every other idea alone. That is the way to success. And that's so true. And we see when Sri Ramakrishna in his sadhaka stage, when he was seeking the vision of the Divine Mother, nothing else came to his mind. That was the one single-minded focus, and we knew that he became successful. And there's another one, Vivekananda also, I'm not sure whether he wrote it in a letter or it was a part of a talk, but in one place Swami Vivekananda said, live for an ideal, and that one ideal alone, let it be so strong, so great, that there may be nothing else left in the mind. No time for anything else, no place for anything else. When that happens, we will see success is very near. So sometimes we might wonder that, I've been meditating for so many years, I've been doing japa, I've been doing bhajan, singing, seva, I'm doing so much, and no, haven't made any progress. And then we really have to see how much of my time and energy I've invested into this, that I'm expecting some big returns for what I have invested into it. Swami, Holy Mother used to say something, that these great rishis of the Vedic rishis meditated for hundreds of years, and then they saw this, and we want to do a few minutes of meditation in the morning and evening and say, why I have not realized God yet? It's not actually the quantity, it's not how much time you spend, but the quality, and the quality really means that ananya yoga, that if I have competing goals and ideals in my life, then it will happen, but it will take time. So it's not as if we shouldn't have other goals in life, but it's good to have one ultimate goal in life. And for a bhakta, that ultimate goal in life is God. But for devotees of Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, the goal is Holy Mother and Thakur. Now all other goals that we have, so long as those goals are somewhere along the way, I think that's fine. It's a little bit like you have to go to some place, and then you say, well, I've got a bunch of other errands to finish. Now, if those different chores that you have, if they are somewhere along the way, I'll go pick something from a market and put gas in your car. If all that is on the way, and that's fine. You do this, then ultimately you go. But if some of these things are in the opposite direction, then of course it's going to take time. So it's good to have many goals if we want, but if we want to reach that ultimate ideal quickly, then we must make sure that somehow all of our other goals are in the same direction. And one way of putting all the goals in the same direction would be, can I spiritualize my life? And by that I mean, even the things that are normally seen as secular activities, is it possible for me to transform them into a part of my spiritual? And that's the whole Karma Yoga is really, it's that. Because one would say, for a physician to be treating the patients who come to you, but what is so spiritual about it? I'm just taking care of their physical pain. Or if you are a teacher or you're a professor, let's say you are a professor of Japanese and you are teaching Japanese, what's so spiritual about teaching Japanese? Or if you are, whatever that we do, whether I'm gardening, I'm cooking, I'm doing shopping. So a lot of these activities are not very visibly spiritual or religious, as we might say. But then, one way would be that no matter what I'm doing, whatever activities we are engaged in, we are using some of the skills that we have, some of the knowledge that we have, some talent that we have. So, if we see that all the skills, knowledge, talent, whatever it is that I have, it has come to me through God's grace. And by employing these skills and knowledge in a way to help people around me, I'm really doing it out of love for God. I'm doing it. So that becomes, so acknowledging somehow the presence of God in our life, that everything that I have is come through God's grace, and by using those qualities, that knowledge, that skill in a proper way, in a selfless way, I'm in a way doing God's worship. So that way, as long as the work that I do is ethical and moral, it has to follow dharma, that's for sure. I mean, of course, in India, some of the dacoits also had their own goddess. They want to go and kill somebody, they'll go and first pray and then went. So, I'm not sure how that system worked, but you can't say that, oh, I'm just going to do something unethical, but I'm going to do it in a detached way. I'm going to do it as an offering to God. Doesn't work. So that's important. So as long as my work is moral, ethical, follow dharma, then it's possible to transform that ethical activity into a spiritual practice. And that is really what Karma Yoga is. So that is what Krishna is saying here. Those who worship me resign all actions to me, regarding me as the supreme goal. So as long as God is somewhere in this whole scenario, then he says they come before me. They come, and I, the savior out of the ocean of the mortal samsara. So this, the world we know is often, they use the analogy of an ocean, Bhavasagara, and the Lord is the one who takes us across this. And so there is a story sometimes told about, there are lots of stories in Bengal especially, between the arguments between the Vaishnavas and the Shaktas, the worshippers of Krishna and the worshippers of the Divine Mother. And so here was this one Vaishnava who said to a Shakta, he said, Krishna alone will take us across this ocean of samsara. Nobody else can do it. Krishna alone can take us. This is what he's really saying. Out of this ocean of the mortal samsara. So Krishna is the one who takes us across. And then that person, that Shakta, who was the worshipper of the Devi, he totally agreed. He said, I completely agree with you. That's exactly how it is. And the Vaishnava was surprised. How did he agree with me? And then that worshipper of Devi says, my Divine Mother, she is the Empress of the whole universe. She is not going to personally carry everybody there. So she has hired this boatman. So again, this is a kind of joking way, but there are all these kind of debates about who is superior, who is higher. And that's something what we saw yesterday, about how sometimes when our idea of God gets narrowed down to my own particular idea, and then we try to put one above the other, one superior or inferior to the other. And so Krishna describes it further in verse 8. Mayeva mana adhatsva mai buddhim niveshaya nivasishyasi mayeva ata urdhvam na samshayaha. Fix thy mind on me only, place thy intellect in me, then thou shalt no doubt live in me hereafter. So putting the mind, intellect, so everything, all of our faculties that we have, if they remain directed toward God, then the truth can be reached. And that's the practice about seeing God in everything, seeing the presence of God in everything. And so there are two ways we go about. First is to look at the perishable, transient nature of life, and then see that beyond this perishable, transient thing, there is something permanent, there is something eternal. Because if you only look at one thing, if you only look at the transient nature, then it can be very depressing. Like, well, everything is vanishing, everything is gone. It leaves me then nothing to hold on to. On the other hand, if I just say, oh, there is God, I still have this problem of, well, then what about all this? And that's sometimes the question that people have. And that is, if God exists, why is there all this pain and suffering? The problem of evil. And that's tricky. That's tricky because oftentimes we, as devotees, we tend to identify God with that which is good. And that's why we've got God is love, God is good, and so on. In itself, I think they are very wonderful statements. The problem with that is, when I identify God with that which is good, I'm left with all this evil and wickedness, and then you say, well, if God is good, then who brings all this evil? Then we have to either invent a devil to account for it, and it's still the problem isn't solved. Well, God is all powerful. Why doesn't God destroy all this evil and free us from this problem once and forever? Mark Twain once said, he said that God did not understand human psychology. Because he said Adam ate the apple not because he loved apples, but just because he was told he should not eat it. If God had told them to not eat the serpent, they would have eaten the serpent. The whole problem would have been nipped in the bud itself. And so that's the thing. So how do we account for evil? And so in the Geeta's teaching, and Vedanta says God is not good. That doesn't mean God is bad, of course. It means God transcends the idea of good and bad. So when we say God is good or God is love, we are actually diminishing God in some ways. By identifying God with only one aspect of the manifested reality, then we are lost. We don't know what to do with the other. And so here is this question. Can I see God and the world at the same time? Can I keep my own human identity and see the infinite at the same time? And that's not possible. We would like to. I mean, who wouldn't want to have God's vision? All of us say, oh, it's so nice. Bhagwan ka darshan ho jaye, kitni achhi baat hai. If I see God. But why am I not able to see God? Because in order to see God, there's something I have to give up. And that is the real difficult part. There is a Sanskrit verse, which is also a similar verse occurs in Tamil, in Tirukkural. Unfortunately, at this moment, I'm not able to remember the original of neither the Tamil or the Sanskrit. But the idea is this: that if there is a beautiful, say, a wooden elephant, beautifully carved, nicely painted, and what this verse points out is, if you see the elephant, you don't see the wood. If you see the wood, you won't see the elephant. You can't see both at the same time. Or if you go to the classic example of a rope mistaken for a snake. A coiled rope in a semi-lit room, we mistake that rope for a snake. Now, at any given moment, I'm going to see either the snake or the rope. I can't see both, because they are not two distinct things. If I see the snake, I'm not seeing the rope. If I see the rope, I cannot see the snake. Which is why I cannot see God and world at the same time. They are not two realities. The reality is one. The enlightened ones see that one as God, and the unenlightened ones see that same one as the world. So in order to see God, the world has to vanish. So that's the real problem with us. Because letting go of the world is terrifying. It's almost like pulling the rug from under your feet. We saw yesterday how when Narendra, when he first went to Sri Ramakrishna, and Sri Ramakrishna just touched him, and all these forms and everything started disappearing, he was terrified. He said, "What are you doing to me? I've got my parents." So, and then of course, Sri Ramakrishna said, "Okay, let's let it wait for a while." So that's the challenge. That why we would love to have a vision of the divine. Oftentimes we are not, as long as we are not ready to pay the price for it. Everything, nothing, then this is one important lesson in life. We should have learned by this time, or if not, I hope we learn it soon, that there is nothing free. Nothing comes free. Even the so-called free apps you may be downloading are not really free. You are paying in some form. In fact, if you pay for an app, that's so much better, because you know what you're paying for it. Because if you think it's free, you're paying in a way you don't even know what you're giving up in order to get what is apparently free. So nothing is free. And of course, as we get older, we realize that everything in life has a price. And if what we are seeking is an eternal freedom and happiness and perfection, that can't come on the cheap. There is a price for it. And so that's what Krishna is pointing out. The price for that is that our entire being must be immersed in that highest reality. Which is not to say, of course, and I'm sure this is obvious to all of you, that this doesn't mean like I've got so many things to attend to, I've got my duties, responsibilities. How can I put my whole mind on God? Now, putting the whole mind on God doesn't mean sitting in some corner and doing your mala. In and through every activity. In fact, if I carry out all the duties and responsibilities I have in life as best I can, remembering God, that's the way to put my mind on God. It's not just about sitting or just even reading the Geeta or studying a text. There is this, that old book was there, Zen and the Art of Archery. Have you seen that? It's a tiny little book. So that book, I believe it's in that book. So it's written by an Englishman, I believe, someone who goes to Japan and he wants to study Zen. And then he approaches many masters and says, teach me Zen, teach me. He thought, and then someone tells him, no, this is not, there is no like Zen classes, there is no book in which you just take a few lessons. They recommend you take up some art. You choose something, whether it's a martial art or a flower decoration or some kind of a art, and in and through your training in that art, the Zen principles you will be able to imbibe. And then he chooses to learn archery, and then through that art of archery he said how he learned Zen. And that's something as students of Vedanta we can ask ourselves. If someone were to come to you and say, oh, I want to learn Vedanta, what would you recommend? And I guess many of us would say, well, read Vivekananda's books or read the Geeta. So oftentimes our approach seems to be quite textual, which is important. I mean, texts are important, and a lot of good is done through them. But we might have to ask, is it possible to not just understand Vedanta intellectually through books, but if I have to imbibe these principles, what should I do? For that matter, even if someone says, I want to learn about Ramakrishna, about Holy Mother, about Swami Vivekananda, while texts, reading their life, reading their teachings, attending lectures or talks or retreats might be one way, but that's by no means a complete way. I think we cannot understand Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, Swamiji unless and until we make an effort to somehow put their principles in our life, in our day-to-day situation. However imperfectly we might do it, but only then that I think learning about Ramakrishna or Holy Mother is not simply reading from books. But then even if I take one of their teaching and then say, beginning tomorrow morning or beginning now, I'm going to very consciously try to put that teaching in my life. Such a person who has even taken one teaching of these great ones and have tried to live according to that as best they can, I think is a better student of Ramakrishna, Holy Mother and Swamiji than someone who might have read a lot of books about that. So books are useful, but they also have their limitations. And so that's what Krishna is pointing out here. In verse 9, Atachittam samadhatum na shaknoshi mai sthiram abhyasa yogena tato mamichaptum dhananjaya. If thou art unable to fix thy mind steadily on me, then by abhyasa yoga, do thou seek to reach me, O Dhananjaya. Abhyasa yoga, of course, means a repeated practice. When later on in the Geeta, when Arjuna tells Krishna, oh, this mind is so difficult to control, how can I, for any concentrated activity, we need the mind. And if the mind is disturbed, the mind is distracted, I cannot do anything. So how can I bring my mind under control? And then Krishna agrees with him. Krishna doesn't say, Krishna says, yeah, that's right, mind is difficult to control. But then he says, there are two things we need to do. And he says, Abhyasa and Vairagya. These are the two ways that the mind, so Abhyasa means a repeated practice. We know when you are learning some new art or anything new, in the beginning you have to practice a lot. And then once it kind of becomes your second nature, then it becomes easy. So that's what Krishna means here by Abhyasa Yoga. There is a story told about one devotee in our Southern California center in the 60s or 50s, 60s, sometime during that period, was a disciple of Swami Prabhavanandaji. And so she was initiated by Swami Prabhavanandaji. And she had many questions about japa. How to do this, how should I say it, what is the meaning of the japa, what is the meaning of the mantra. And Swami Prabhavanandaji tried to answer as many questions as he could. But her question just wouldn't end. Like every detail about that practice. Finally, he just looked at her and said, "Just do it." And it was such a powerful way. She remembered it all her life. She said, "My guru said, just do it." Because at some point, we just have to do it. Because that's the way we discover. Whatever questions come, everything gets resolved. Otherwise, all our life will be just asking questions. It's like you go for a driving lesson. And even before you have started the car, you keep on asking questions, and your questions can never end. I mean, there's so much can be asked. But if I never ask, the car is going to be in the same place, and I'm never going to be able to drive. So at some point, even if I'm not able to do it perfectly, I just have to start. I remember I didn't know any driving when I came to this country, and so when we got a car in Boston, and so they said better to. One of the devotees kind of taught me a little bit, but then he said it's better to join a driving school and get systematic lessons. So then they'll be able to give some tips, which an informal learning may not. I may not get it there. So my idea was, how will the first lesson, what will it be? And so when the car came to take me, I went, and I was surprised that the trainer simply said, he put me in the driver's seat and he said, start driving. I said, no. and that was the most direct method. I had never imagined it. And he said, don't worry. He had those parallel controls there. So he said, don't worry, you are safe. If you do any mistake, I can always correct it from here. And he just started driving that way. And so that's what Krishna means here by Abhyasa Yoga. That while satisfying our intellectual curiosity is important, helpful, but Abhyasa, we need to start right away. And then he says, Abhyasepi asamarthosi mat karma paramo bhava madarthamapi karmani kurvan siddhim avapsyasi. If also thou art unable to practice Abhyasa, be thou intent on doing actions for my sake. Even by doing actions for my sake, thou shalt attain perfection. This is the practice of Karma Yoga. Offer everything at the feet of God. You'll find a similar scenario, more or less, enacted in the life of Ramakrishna when Girish Chandra Ghosh wanted instructions from Sri Ramakrishna, and then Sri Ramakrishna said, okay, told him, repeat this mantra, and then he said, oh no, this is too much for me, I can't do this. And then Ramakrishna, okay, if you can't do this, then try to do this. And he said, no, I can't even do that. So whatever options that Sri Ramakrishna gives, he says, no, I don't think I can do that. And then finally Sri Ramakrishna said, okay, simple thing, just give me your power of attorney. You don't need to do anything at all. I will decide everything for you. And then Girish Chandra thought, that was that was a great offer. That I don't have to do anything. Sri Ramakrishna will do everything, and I have given my power of attorney to him. So while in the beginning it seemed like the easy way out, Girish Chandra later on said, I realized that was the most difficult thing. Because he then realized, even if I feel thirsty, even if I have to pick up a glass, I can't do it unless Ramakrishna wills it. So every little thing, because everything now, he decides everything for me. With that, he said he had to consciously keep his mind, make sure that every little thing he was doing was actually the will of Ramakrishna. And that completely benefited him. So sometimes some things apparently look very simple. In the Ramanuja Sampradaya, there is this path of prapatti, completely surrender. When a devotee realizes, I am incapable of doing anything, I just surrender fully. Again, that surrender doesn't come. It's easy to say verbally, oh, I surrender everything. It's easy to speak, but it doesn't happen. And in order for that to happen, we must feel completely vulnerable. We must feel completely helpless. And as long as our ego is strong, we will not have that feeling of helplessness. You know the story about the bird sitting on the mast of a ship. Sri Ramakrishna says that there was this one a ship anchored in a port, and a bird was sitting on the mast of that ship. And then afterwards the ship set sail, and then the bird had fallen asleep. Have you seen a bird asleep? Birds
They just kind of
sometimes.
Yeah.
But they don't have eyelids, right? So they sleep with their eyes open.
No, I've seen them close
They
their
have
eyes.
eyelids?
I don't know if it's eyelids or if they're just
Or something.
the
It's a-
whole thing contracts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So they have a way of doing it.
Yeah.
Any of you have bird as pets? Oh yeah, so you are the authority. Have you seen your...
Yes, I have seen it. They will put their beak in and beak with the wing and they would sleep.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sometimes they are so fast asleep they fall.
Oh, okay. Wow. Are they able to recognize, identify you just like
they,
a dog's could?
they
So
can recognize and they know the time and everything.
Oh.
They know all.
My nana used to have a ritual of a parrot, and my nana would make morning tea for himself and his brother, and he would call his brother Virju, child, one day. So then this new bird that they got, it kind of learned, and then bird would call Virju, and he would call.
That's smart.
I know.
So this bird then fell asleep on the mast of the ship. And then the ship set sail, and when the bird woke up, it suddenly found out there is water on all sides. But his nest and everything is there on the land, so he had to go back because his family is there. So he then flew, but the ship had gone so far inside that it was a tiny little bird, it couldn't fly continuously, not like a non-stop flight from Toronto to Delhi or something. So he said, no, my wings can't take it anymore. So then he just comes back and sits on the mast. Then he thought perhaps they maybe land somewhere in this direction. So he goes, flies to the north, again water everywhere, again comes east, tries everywhere and finds no land at all. So the only safe place is this mast, that top of the mast. So he just sits there. And then eventually, then the ship reaches another port and it reaches land, and then it's able to go. Exactly. It's inspired by that same song. So the bowl. So then, so there is this Bengali song inspired by that. That a bird you just sit on that. So one of our Swami, his name was Swami Madhavanandaji. He was a disciple of Holy Mother. He was the 9th president of the order. So he used to say that all of the spiritual practices that we do are really to tire our wings. Because as long as you feel you have an energy to fly and reach this thing, then you are going to try this, try that. And ultimately you realize, no, there's nothing I can do. Let me just go and sit there and just wait. And so similarly, we might try a lot of things in life, and only when our wings are completely exhausted, when we realize by my own little power I cannot do anything, only then will the real surrender, real sharanagati will come, when that ego is completely destroyed. But as long as you feel, no, I can do it. I'm not saying I can do it is a wrong, is a something that we shouldn't have. Because if I can do it, of course I should try to do it. But we can't pretend. It's like inside, I feel I can do it. We're like, oh no, I've surrendered everything to Mother. And it doesn't work. Because people have been saying that for years and nothing happens. And so, but real sharanagati, that's what Krishna is saying here. That if you completely give everything, then siddhim avapsis, he will attain perfection. And then again, verse 11. Ata etadapi ashaktosi kartum madyogamashritah sarvakarma phalatyagam tataf kuru yatatmavan. If thou art unable to do even this, then take refuge in me. That is what surrender means. Abandon the fruit of all action, being self-controlled. And then verse 12. Shreyo hi jnanam abhyasa jnana dhyanam vishishyate dhyana karma phalatyagaha tyagat shanti ranantaram. Better indeed is knowledge than blind abhyasa. Meditation with knowledge is more esteemed than mere knowledge. Then meditation, the renunciation of the fruits of action. Peace immediately follows renunciation. So then it gives kind of a gradation of how this is better than this is better than that, is better than that. And this is again not to show that something is essentially better than this, but we have to start where we are. So we can start with the most preliminary steps, and then as we attain perfection in that, then we go to the next step, then we go to the next step. And that's essentially, even in our school system, that's what we do. You're in the first grade, then you go to the second grade and third grade. So that way of progressing in spiritual life is always the safe way. In Bengali, sometimes there is a phrase called "Echode Paka." That means you have ripe in not in the proper season. Artificially ripened this thing, it's not that sweet. So if you see mangoes, etc., if they are naturally ripened, they are really very sweet. But if you can artificially play tricks with it and try to ripen it quickly, then you don't get that original taste. So Holy Mother sometimes used to say that it's much better that in spiritual life we gradually grow from one step. It's like we are ripening in a very natural progress. Then it's much more this fruit in the end is much more sweeter than suddenly drastically something happening. Of course, we would all want miracles to happen in our life, and they can. But while we are waiting for the miracle, let's also keep doing something about it. So beginning now, verse 13 till the end of the book, verse 20, Krishna gives a list of qualities that are ideal, that an ideal bhakta possesses. And all of these will end with saying, Bhakta Same Priyaha, such a devotee is dear to me. So I'm going to say something before we read these verses. And that is, in all the classical Vedanta texts, there is a certain pattern that is followed. In the beginning will be the affirmation of that ultimate reality. Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, for instance, one chapter in the Taittiriya Upanishad begins. Then that theoretical declaration gets explained in the first section. Then the next portion will give how can I reach that, the practical aspect of it. And then it ends by saying what would happen when I reach that. What are the characteristics? What are the kind of things I can expect when I reach the goal? And that's the classical pattern. Theory, practice, result. In the Geeta, in the second chapter of the Geeta, you'll see that's exactly what it is. So, well, the Geeta we normally say is 18 chapters, but Krishna really begins his teaching from the 11th verse of the second chapter. Until that point, Krishna doesn't say much, other than in that first chapter, one place, he just brings the chariot in between and said, okay, look at these people, that's all. So much of the lecture in the first chapter of the Geeta is really given by Arjuna. Arjuna then very eloquently points out how terrible is war and what are the evil effects of war and why, trying to justify himself, why he's not going to fight. And what's important is, when Krishna begins to speak in the beginning of the second chapter, he doesn't contradict not one thing about Arjuna, because everything that Arjuna has said is actually right. War is terrible. Violence is never something that can be recommended. And so Krishna agrees with all of that. But then, the problem is not that war is good. The problem is not that. The problem is something else. And that's what he's pointing out to Arjuna at the beginning of the second chapter. He says, you, from where has this unmanliness, where has all your value system disappeared? And then Arjuna, rather than looking outside, oh, these are the people I want to fight, he then looks inside. And when he looks inside, then he realizes, Karpanya dosho apahata swabhavaha prichhami tvam dharma sammudha chetaha. I am confused. That's what dharma sammudha. What is dharma? What is my duty? But I do not know. So the problem is not war. The problem is by confusion. And then he said, Shishyasteham shadhimam tvam prapadye. Because until that point, Arjuna was very sure what to do. So that's why he says, war is bad, I'm not going to fight. He's already taken a decision. And so Krishna had nothing to, there's no reason why Krishna should have said anything. But only when Arjuna looks in his own heart and says, I'm confused. Shishyasteham, please accept me as your student. Teach me. Tell me what I should do. Only when he makes that clear and open declaration that please accept me as your student, only then Krishna begins. And that's the traditional form. That a student has to go to the teacher and say, please teach me. Without that, the teaching may not begin. And so then Krishna's teaching begins in 11th verse of the second chapter. He then, rather than addressing exactly about whether you should go, he just begins by speaking about the nature of the Atman. So you have the first section in the second chapter about the nature of the Atman. What is the spirit? The weapons cannot cut it. The nainam chinnanti shastrani, nainam dahati pavakaha, all those things. Then, beginning with verse 39, 40, around that part of he speaks about the way. He describes essentially the path of Karma Yoga. How when my heart is pure, it's only then that Atman can be realized. So he shows first the theory, then the practice, and then the second chapter ends with showing what would happen when I reach that truth. So, if Arjuna had been really intelligent, then the Geeta would have been a much smaller book. The Geeta would have ended with the second chapter. That's it. But luckily for us, Arjuna had many questions. So essentially, from chapter 3 onwards, it's a very extended question-answer session. You'll find pretty much every chapter, including this chapter 12, begins with a question. So the main lecture is over in second chapter. And then this question-answer session begins. In the second chapter, towards the end, you'll find there is a section called Sthita Prajna Lakshana, the characteristics of a person whose prajna has become sthita, whose mind, whose intellect has gotten established in the Atman, one who has realized, one who is enlightened. And the question can come is, what's the point in describing the characteristics of the enlightened being now? Because, well, I'm not enlightened. How does it benefit me knowing how an enlightened being lives or what an enlightened being does? Because when I become enlightened, that's how I'm going to be, but right now I'm not. So merely describing an enlightened person's characteristics, what would that do? And Shankaracharya explains in his commentary that the characteristics of the enlightened become the disciplines of the unenlightened. So whenever now, and this is important, because whenever now Krishna says, oh, this kind of bhakta is dear to me, means the message to me is, these are the qualities I must cultivate in my life, because then I'll be a true bhakta and then I'll be dear to Krishna. So when he says this is it, means this is what I should do. This is how we should translate it inside our mind. As one of our Swamis, Swami Yogeshananda, he is now, I believe he's 96 or 97. He stays in Trabuco. He joined the order way back, sometime in the 50s, I believe. he was in San Francisco Center under Swami Ashokananda for a while. And so he has this, if you haven't read it, take a look, there's a book called Six Lighted Windows. It's written about the 6 Swamis that came in the West, that he came to know closely, with whom he had a chance to live, and his reminiscences of what he learned. And it's a very fascinating book. So one thing that really drew my attention, which I really liked very much, was that when he was in San Francisco Monastery, he was there in the monastery for around 4 or 5 years, I believe. And then he goes to the Swami there, Swami Ashokanandaji. And then 5 years are over, and he's not yet become enlightened. And so he goes to the Swami Ashokananda and he said, now I've been practicing all this for 5 years, and still no enlightenment has come. What more should I do in order to become enlightened? What else do I need to do in order to become enlightened? And Swami Ashokanandaji said, what are you waiting for? As if some day is going to come, I am going to be enlightened, and then I am going to do these XYZ things. He said, don't wait. Why don't you start living now as if you are already enlightened? So what I would do after enlightenment, I can try to do now when I am not enlightened. Now, what does that mean really? It means this. For an enlightened being to live like an enlightened being is easy. They just have to be themselves, because they are enlightened and they are living like enlightened being. For an unenlightened person to live like an enlightened being, that's tough, because you're trying to live like somebody who you are not at that moment. So it needs effort, it needs practice. So when we read, an enlightened being is always selfless, an enlightened being is always cheerful, then if I'm unenlightened, if this is what I want to become, then I say, okay, now let me think I'm already enlightened. Now in order to kind of live true to that description of enlightenment, I have to make effort to be selfless, to be cheerful, and so on. And if I keep on practicing like that, eventually that's how I will be. So if I can, let's say, among the characteristics of the enlightened being are someone who is completely at peace, one who can live without expectations, one who is always happy, one who is thinking of others. So let's say if I can live even for 1 minute, just 1 minute, with no expectation of any kind. Because if we look in our heart and say, well, there are so many things I expect. I expect things from my family, from my children, from the government, from the world, from life. There are so many expectations. And we have very limited control over any of those things. If they happen, well, great. If not, then I'm going to be disappointed because I expected it and it didn't happen. That's why they also say, Asha hi paramam dukkham, nairashyam paramam sukham. The more expectation is I'm opening the possibility of more disappointment because I want something and I don't get it. On the other hand, you say, I don't want anything. What we oftentimes think is if I live without expectations, I'm not going to get anything, which is not true. I'm going to get what I'm going to get. That's there. So whether I expect something or not is not going to change the outcome. It's like, oh, I hope it rains. I'm expecting rain today. And if it doesn't rain, then I'm going to be disappointed. On the other hand, let's say it is supposed to rain. But I say, I'm not expecting. I live without any expectation. Whatever happens. That doesn't mean it's not going to rain. If it's going to rain, it's going to rain. So, actually most fans of sports teams don't realize it. Because when you go for a game, everyone wants your team to win. Now whichever team is going to win is going to win. Your expectation doesn't change anything at all. It's just kind of creating excitement from both sides, and ultimately one side is going to be disappointed, another side is going to rejoice. But that's the story of our life. And so if I can live even for say 1 minute with some great using my willpower and determination like an enlightened being, That's not easy. Even to live like an enlightened being for 1 minute may not be easy. But if I can do that, then for that 1 minute, I'm kind of enlightened. It's like just part-time enlightenment. Now, if I can do that for 1 minute, that's already a very hopeful sign. Because if I can do it for 1 minute, with a little bit of more effort, I can maybe after 6 months I can do it for 2 minutes at a stretch. Maybe 3 minutes. Then I know exactly what to do. The rest of my life is just keep on expanding this to 5, 6, 7. Maybe then I might be able to do for half an hour at a stretch. And then eventually, when I can do it 24/7, well, I've already become enlightened. So rather than thinking of enlightenment as some kind of a like boom, I'm now unenlightened and then suddenly I'm enlightened, which can happen, of course. Sudden enlightenment, there are been many cases of people who are suddenly enlightened. But as I said, if that happened, that's great. But why not make an effort? Let me start being at least part-time enlightened. And so these are the kind of things that we need to do. So that Sthita Prajna Lakshana in the second chapter, this set of verses, are the kind of qualities I need to cultivate and live on a daily basis to become enlightened. Now this set of verses that we are going to see from verse 13 through 20 are a second set in the Geeta when Krishna says this is the ideal bhakta. So these are the kind of qualities I can try to develop consciously to become enlightened. So that's the purpose of this description of these characteristics. So before we go there, if you have any thoughts, ideas, questions, comments, feel free to ask, and then if we have time we can then proceed.
Swamiji, Pranam. I was just following up on this, that rope or snake, you cannot have vision of both at the same time. Same thing, the elephant and the rope. I was just wondering, Sarvam Khalu Idam Brahm. That is what Shruti says. Now, that statement, if that is the case, then name and form, how it could be the Brahma.
The name and form is not Brahma. Sarvam Khalu Idam Brahma really means that which appears as Sarvam is nothing but Brahma.
So that includes the name and form. And the causality.
No, it doesn't include. In order to include something, it must exist.
Right.
Name and forms don't have no existence, so it can't include. I'm just being very philosophically accurate about it, because to include something, it has to have a positive content. And so it's like saying the snake is included in the rope, but there is really no snake apart from the rope. And you can say the snake is included in the rope, or all this snake and rope, this is all rope, and so snake is included in the rope. If you say, then I could say name and form are included in Brahman.
Right, but actually there is no snake. It is the
exactly the same way there is no name and form. So you see, in a kind of a general sort of way, to say that all this is nothing but divine, all this is nothing but God, and God alone exists. They're not, philosophically they are not identical statements. They are different. Although in a kind of a general sort of way, just like, well, it means the same thing. All this is the God, and God alone exists. But the whole point of all this is God really means all this is not, God alone is. So this is denying an objective independent existence to all and identifying with God is different by saying this is not, God alone is. In fact, I believe in the 5th volume of Swamiji's complete works, he had correspondence with, there is one Mary Hale whom he saw as this adopted sister. She lived in Chicago. And so they had a correspondence apparently in verse, in a poetry form. And so Swamiji wrote saying that God alone exists. And then she replied, putting it in her own words, saying, well, all this is God. And then Swamiji again would say, no, all this is not God. God alone exists. So it's kind of a very playful correspondence, but the idea is that Sarvam Khalu Idam Brahma really means Sarvam Idam Na Asti Brahmaiva Asti. Am I making myself clear?
Yeah, so the time, space and things being Padartha,
Causality. Desha Kala Nimitta.
Right. So that is something which can be removed from our conception or from our...
Yes, it can be removed because it is not there. If it were there, you could never remove it. Well, see, one of the important things in Vedanta is definition of real. What is real? What does reality mean? What is the most important ingredient of reality? What makes one thing real and another thing unreal? Okay, here is the question. What do you think? What is most needed for something to be real?
Existence.
Good, very good. Existence.
To exist.
No, you don't need a form. It must exist. Sat. Because only if thing exists will I experience it. Right? So existence is important for something to be real. On the other hand, if things exist, I will experience it, but there are things that we experience and still we say they are not real. Such as your dream. Now, at night you experience your dream, you experience the dream world, and that next morning you say, oh, that's only a dream. It's not real, because you wake up into this real world and then we dismiss dreams as unreal. So again, in spite of experiencing the dream, why and how am I able to dismiss it as unreal? And although not everyone may analyze it this way, the instinctive way we dismiss dreams as unreal because the dream world did not exist before I fell asleep. The dream world doesn't exist after I wake up. It seems to have some kind of a limited existence during that period. And because it doesn't persist, because it begins and ends, we say it's not real. Or if you see a mirage in a desert, we say it's not real. You are experiencing it, but for the same reason. So in addition to existence, a thing must persist. If a thing disappears, then we say it's not real. And therefore Satya, reality, equals Nitya, eternality. If something is real, it has got to be eternal. Now, this doesn't sound like a too startling an observation because it seems so obvious until we apply it to this world. Because if it's possible for me to dismiss dreams as unreal because the dream world didn't exist before I fell asleep and doesn't exist after I wake up, why should it be difficult for me to dismiss this world as unreal? Because this world didn't exist before I woke up, and this world doesn't exist after I go to sleep. Exactly in the same way. Now Maya means, while the two are exactly identical, I think, oh, this is real and that is not real. So name and form, because they don't persist, because names and forms perish, they are not real. So that's, I think if we get that definition of real clear, then it doesn't sound so terrible to, because otherwise it's like Brahma Satya Jagan Mithya, this is not real. It just doesn't make sense to most people. But when you say, why is it considered not real? And so then the inquiry in Vedanta just goes like, what is real then? The dreams are unreal, the world is unreal, then what is real? And the answer is, who is this person who is asking this question? Is the questioner real? We are questioning the existence of the world and things like that. The Vedanta says, what about the questioner, the one who is asking this question? And then you say, the questioner alone is real. In other words, the only entity whose existence is beyond question is myself. Other than myself, I can question the existence of anything. It could be hallucination, I could be imagining, it could be anything. But I cannot say, I'm not sure whether I exist or not. That's that. And so then that's why the inquiry in Vedanta then goes like, well, who is this I then? It always seems to be there. Yeah, that's the idea. That's why the body is not real, but the body disappears when I sleep. All the names and forms, everything disappears. The only thing that never disappears is this consciousness of the self. Consciousness alone remains throughout. Waking up means nothing other than being conscious of this world. Dreaming being nothing other than being conscious of the dream world. I wouldn't see my dreams if I were not conscious of it. I wouldn't see this world if I were not conscious of it. I wouldn't experience the deep peace and total darkness in my deep sleep if I were not conscious of it. So in all the three states, the only thing that never dims, that never disappears, is consciousness. And because it never disappears, that's the only reality. Everything other than that is just a dream. That's why there is an Upanishad called the Aitareya Upanishad. It says, Tatra Traya Swapnaha. There are three kinds of dreams: waking dream, dream dream, deep sleep dream. So what we say are three states are really just all our dreams. So death is another dream, birth is another dream, heaven is another dream, hell is another dream. So we are speaking about even about rebirth and all of that stuff. Everything, it's possible to see our entire existence as just a cascading dreams. You think about Brahmaloka, Suryaloka, Chandraloka, invent as many lokas as you want. Everything is nothing but a dream. Now these dreams will not end unless and until I wake up. And that's what being a Buddha means, waking up. Until that time, everything. We are just passing from one dream to the next dream. So spiritually, we are still asleep. Yanisha Sarva Bhutanam, in the second chapter of the Geeta, when Krishna says, that which is night to the yogi is day to others, that which is night to others is day to yogi. That's exactly what it means.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have real and we have unreal.
No, we just have real. Unreal is what we imagine. We cannot have it. We cannot have something which is not there.
Just those two concepts. Like in our limited understanding, we have those two concepts. So I'm just curious to know the philosophical backing for associating happiness with the real, and how do we know that realizing the real is associated with ananda. And
That's not a theoretical formulation. That's just through direct experience.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why what they say is that after you experience happiness, you can work your way backward and try to connect that happiness. But the happiness that is connected with reality is not a theoretical formulation. It is something that is actually directly experienced. And so what they say is that the real happiness is only in the infinite. And therefore, the happiness that one experiences in deep sleep, when we are not, our consciousness is not limited to this body and mind, that the intensity and depth of that happiness in deep sleep is unmatched than any happiness we might get in the waking or dream, because it is still limited to finite, perishable things. Now, the happiness that one gets in samadhi, when one is not even in any of these three states, that is even higher. So, in our present unenlightened state, the greatest peace and happiness we get every night is in those few minutes when we are in sushupti. But sometimes the question can come: why worry about enlightenment, all of that? Why not just remain in sushupti all along? Yeah, but the thing is this: we cannot. You see, let's say you don't have to rush for work the next day. Let's say you have 6 months, you're completely free, and you say, I'm just going to remain in sushupti for 6 months, and no one need to wake me up, I'm not going to put any alarm and everything. You won't be able to sleep indefinitely. So then the question is, what is it that wakes me up, even if I don't want to wake up? And the answer is, your karma wakes you up. Your karma says, enough of this great happiness and joy, now wake up and get some sukha dukkha. So you say, no, I want to sleep. No, you need this sukha dukkha. So sushupti is something that is not in our control. That's a great blessing. Nowadays many people don't get sushupti itself, but that's one way people think, oh, how do I know God exists? Well, see sushupti. There's one Italian gentleman said, the simple proof for God existence is olive oil. So, at least most of us can say this peace and joy that we experience, well, that is God's, a devotee might say, that's God's grace. But unfortunately, it's not in our control. Now, if we can attain the state of enlightenment, then that same or a much more intense, even than that, peace and bliss can be ours. And the question can be, well, how do I know? Well, I know because there are people before me who have become enlightened and they have experienced. And we may say, well, maybe they were just bluffing. Well, if it is just one or two, there's a possibility. But for generations together, people have said, then they all couldn't be bluffing. So then it's easy to kind of at least accept it as a strong possibility. Yeah.
Thank you, Guruji, for all this wonderful, profound thoughts. So my question is going to be a very silly one, in the sense that we all want enlightenment, and we are trying very hard. But while we are practicing, trying to attain that, what happens in daily life, and that is where I think what you have been saying is absolutely apt there. But suppose I want, say, a degree, and I'm trying to get that, and I put all my heart and soul in it. Usually that takes over my entire life. I'm sleeping and dreaming and thinking, and it just overtakes that. And what I worry about is that very often I don't understand the connection between everyday goals and the larger goal of attaining enlightenment. Enlightenment seems so far away, and the little goals that you have, they seem to be so near, and and it may be very hard. but it's still attainable. You sort of see, okay, this is... So I'm just trying to say, understand, how do we reconcile the two?
No, you cannot. I think first of all, this I think it's partly due to the way we read in books and we have been told. The idea that somehow enlightenment is very far away, I don't quite agree with it for several reasons. One is, if God's grace can come anytime, God loves me, who am I to already prejudge the outcome and say, no, it's going to take a long time. Sometimes thinking that it's going to take a long time itself can be a hurdle. So if I sit for meditation with the idea, it's going to take a long time, then I'm essentially saying my next few minutes of meditation, no big deal, nothing is going to happen because it will. So what's the point? So ideally, for every spiritual seeker, every devotee, every time you pray or meditate, we should sit like, I'm going to be enlightened. Maybe I'll be enlightened right now. I may not have to work for that degree at all. I may not have to go shopping because I'm going to be enlightened. Because what happens sometimes is, we sit with a kind of a clock in front and say, okay, 20 minutes I'll do this because afterwards I need to do this bunch of things. So, now, what I'm really saying is with that kind of a planning, it's a kind of a subtle way of saying, in the next 20 minutes of meditation, nothing much is going to happen. So I've already things planned out for afterwards. But I mean, who knows? I mean, the real one would be, for all I know, I will be a Jivan Mukta by that time. I don't need to do anything else. And that's what Sri Ramakrishna gives the example. He said when someone is catching fish and you sit like, well, nothing is going to happen, then nothing is going to happen. But like every moment you have to be very vigilant. Any time the fish may come and catch the bait. So every time that's how that mindfulness, that full attention will come in meditation, because any moment God's grace might come. Any moment there may be a knock on the door of my heart when Thakur and Mother might come. And that time if I'm planning, now I've got to do that, I've got to do that, I may not hear that knock. And so that is one thing. So we must consciously try to give up the idea that enlightenment is somehow very far away, because it really takes away from the intensity of our daily practice. The second thing is, enlightenment is, what is, Swami Shivanandaji, Mahapurush Maharaj, he said, what's this big deal about self-knowledge? It just means you know yourself. What else? I think going out and doing things, it's much more intensive effort. But the paradox is that we know so much about the world, we know about the distant galaxies, but we know so little about our own self, which is nothing is, I think there is a Prophet Muhammad saying it there, that God is closer to me than my jugular vein. So nothing is closer to me than my own self. So what's the point in knowing everything in the world but not knowing myself? And so it just seems a little odd that knowing myself is more difficult than knowing things which are so far away and outside. And then the third thing is, while we might have this ultimate goal and these other competing goals, how much time and energy I invest into all these things will depend on how I prioritize things in my life. There may be things, now Ramakrishna, he went to school for a few days and said, no, I'm not going to go. And he just didn't go. Now I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't do it, but the way I see it is this, that giving up a tyaga, renunciation, is something that happens. It's not something that is to be done. By that I mean, that by all means one should pursue these different goals in life, and one can have a kind of a mental picture about that's my ultimate goal and these are my goals, and that's okay. But what I'm suggesting is that a time might come when that ultimate goal will become so real, so urgent, so much more alluring that all other goals might become insignificant. They will drop off on their own. Until that time, of course, I must pursue of whatever is of value to me in life. Now, when Sri Ramakrishna was employed as a priest in the Kali temple, he was not a careless person. He was drawing his monthly salary. So he's not like, oh, I won't work, I'll just get paid for my job. He was very methodically doing the worship. Now, even though his mind was hankering for God realization, he didn't say, oh, I'm just going to give this up. We don't find that at all. But a time was reached when he didn't give up work, the work gave him up. In other words, he became incapable of doing the work. Not that he didn't want to do it. He couldn't do it. So he says when he went in the morning to pluck flowers for puja, he suddenly saw that this is the whole universe is an altar of the divine. So he said he couldn't even pluck the flower. He saw the tree as living. He wasn't able to pluck the bilva leaves for puja. So rather than him tearing himself apart from his duties, the duties gave him up. And I think that's essentially what will happen. The more the spiritual goal becomes prominent in my life, the other things will kind of drop off on their own. So renunciation is something that happens naturally. Because if giving up anything, if it's going to cause me pain, that means I still value it, of course. And none of us want to lose something valuable. But when things lose their value for us, getting rid of them is actually a big blessing. With so much needless baggage is lost. And so at every stage, a devotee has to say, what is valuable to me in my life? I don't want to lose things of value. And what my idea of value is will change as I change. We know when we were little children, we maybe played with certain toys or dolls, and which is great because they are great. They say that a little child whose toy is lost and a king whose kingdom is lost, the sorrow that the two experience is not different. If my pet toy is lost and a king's kingdom is lost, the extent and the intention of sorrow is same because both of these creatures, they value those things equally. Although externally we might say, oh, kingdom is such a big thing and a toy is just a toy. But then, as we grow older, ideally we should stop playing with those childhood toys. If someone who is 20 years old is still playing with this toy, then we say, oh, something wrong, right? So as we grow, things that are of interest and of value also change. So similarly, as we grow in spirituality, that our value system also evolves. Things that seemed valuable at one time no longer seem valuable. And that's how essentially then other things will drop off. Okay, another 10 minutes, we'll stop. Yes.
You said that abhyas and vairagya. So what is the
I didn't say Krishna said that.
Krishna says that you should do abhyas and vairagya. So what is vairagya?
Well, that's exactly what I was saying just now. Raga is attachment. Viraga, vigata raga, giving up attachment. And again, I said, giving up attachment seems like a very active thing to do. But I think what really needs to be done is what's called viveka, because vairagya comes after viveka. And viveka means discernment. Viveka means always analyzing what is right, what is not right, what is good, what is not good, what is of value, what is not of value. So it's kind of an analysis of things that come to me in my life. And then, once I'm able to determine for myself at that point, this is good, this is not good, then of course I must be attached to what is good and detach myself from what is not good. Being attached to what is valuable and detach myself from what is not valuable. But what is valuable and what is good, my understanding of what is good and what's valuable will keep changing as I change. As I grow, what seemed valuable at one time may not seem valuable later on. That's how that vairagya will come.
Swamiji, we're told that we are here as a result of our prarabdha karma. We are who we are, where we are born, to who we are born. We're like the arrows on the archer's bow. Is this all destined?
No, it's prarabdha karma. Why destiny? What, it depends on what you mean by destiny, because it's one word, but people, different bells ring in different minds when you use the same word. So what do you mean by destiny?
If my prarabdha, once I asked a teacher, and she asked me back. She said, "You're only 27, and you're here, and then all this. This is your prarabdha karma that brought you to this point." Did I have any role in that, or was it just destined based on my prarabdha karma that I would reap the benefit of that and achieve or get whatever I was trying to get?
Well, the thing is this.
What was the role of free will, agency in that?
What is the role?
Or what was there a role of free will, the agency in that?
There is. See, prarabdha karma, actually the main problem is this, that there are actually two different things. Actions and fruits of action. Action is karma, fruits of action is karma phala. The whole confusion gets created because a lot of times, instead of saying karma phala, we use the word karma. Oh, this is because of my karma. What we need is this is because of the karma phala. So we need to first of all distinguish action and the results of action. Now when you say prarabdha karma, it's actually prarabdha karma phala. It's so, well, how do we know with prarabdha karma? And the answer is we don't know. Questions come in the minds of human beings like, well, I'm like this now. What does it all mean? Why come people are different? Why come I have this set of joys and sorrows, somebody else a different set of sorrows? And nobody knows an answer to it. And if you don't know an answer, then you theorize. You have to figure out, at least for your own mental satisfaction, is there any is there any method to this madness, or is just random? So one theory is it's just random, no one knows. The other theory is everything happened by God's will. God has decided that this person has to suffer and this person is not to suffer. That's one theory. Again, there is no proof for it. It's a theory. And just as with any theory, doubts or questions can be raised. Because if everything happened by God's will, then why would God will that somebody should suffer, and why will God will that somebody should have all these wonderful opportunities in life? Because it contradicts with our other idea about God, that God loves all equally. We are all God's children. And so then we have to reconcile. So whoever has come up with that theory that everything happens through God's will has to reconcile these kind of questions that can come. So every theory will raise questions. So this has been the other theories about theory of karma. That one, don't bring God into the picture. That whatever I am experiencing is a result of my own past actions. And so that kind of leaves God free from accusations of impartiality or God having favorites and so on. And then we take the responsibility ourselves. And so and then the idea of the theory of karma is tied up with theory of rebirth. Because that's the only way you can kind of make this theory make sense. It's still a theory. Still there is no proof. But it's just a theory. So prarabdha karma means that when a soul takes birth, it already comes with some fund of karma phala, not karma, to experience certain joys and sorrows in that life. And the lifespan of a person is determined by, as long as that amount of joy and sorrow that I am supposed to experience in this life is not exhausted, I am going to live. That's why it's also good practice not to become too joyful or too sorrowful. You're burning up your budget. So be happy a little, be soft, so you'll kind of stretch it for a long time. So simple way of living long is not to go to the extremes of joy and sorrow. Just kind of, because that is a fixed number, prarabdha. So you want to keep it lasting a longer time. Now, free will is what you're going to do now. So your prarabdha does not determine your actions. Prarabdha determines only what you experience. So when you choose to do something or not choose to do something, you cannot blame it on your karma. And so we have a free will, yes. Because otherwise, it's kind of an easy way out. If people do stupid things and say, oh, that's my karma. No, that's not my karma, that's my stupidity. That's stupidity.
But isn't your intelligence part of your prarabdha karma?
Which one?
Your intelligence.
No. Again, don't say prarabdha karma, prarabdha karma phala.
Yeah.
Karma phala is simply sukha and dukkha.
Right.
Sukha and dukkha has nothing to do with your intelligence.
No, but I mean like when you did something, when the person did something stupid.
Yeah, again.
The reason they're stupid.
Yes, so what happens is this, that every action really creates two results, two effects. One is, now to give a kind of a concrete example, let's say I've never drunk coffee in my life. And so very first cup of coffee that I drink, and I drink that coffee and I really love it. So I've done one karma, drinking that coffee. Karma phala is the joy that it gave me. So that's one effect of that karma. The second effect of that karma is it leaves a mental impression on the mind. That's called samskara. So if I drink coffee, it leaves a coffee samskara. Now, because that coffee has given me joy, that particular samskara is a kind of a joy-giving samskara, as long as I love coffee. And so what that samskara does is, next time I'm passing by Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts or something, that external thing triggers this samskara in my heart and a desire for coffee comes up. And because first time I had it brought me joy, I think, oh, it will bring me joy. And so then I go and get another cup of coffee. Makes me happy again. And now I had one samskara, now I have two. So the possibility of that desire for coffee coming up becomes almost double now, the probability, because in place of one I have two. Now this is just one small example. Now how many small and big actions we have done in this life and in the trillions and gazillion lives we have had. So our mind is filled with samskaras. And some of these are joy-bearing samskaras, some other are painful samskaras. And it's almost like now they have, what do you call that? These apps now, they are smart, they learning.
Artificial intelligence.
Yeah, machine learning. Yeah, it's exactly like machine learning. So the mind learns. So now the mind learns, oh, this is the joyful samskara, this is the painful. And so next time I have to make any decision, this fund of samskaras in my mind helps me then choose, oh, will it now, I just immediately use that, the algorithm, whatever is there inside, and say, okay, this might bring me joy, so I choose it. So that's where your intelligence comes in. So intelligence is really nothing but the database in your mind based on your past impressions. And then every time you kind of make a wrong choice, it needs some auto-correction inside. So I think we should stop now, right? And then we'll have Arati at 7 o'clock, and then after Arati we can, if you still haven't got tired, we'll discuss this a little bit more after the Arati.
We mentioned yesterday that please